Hello and welcome to Mothman's Bookshop. My name is Nicole, and today I'd like to tell you about The Archivist by Martha Cooley. Warning, I'll try and make this as spoiler-free as possible, but given it's a book review, there are bound to be a couple spoilers. Well, first of all, hi, I'm back. This break has been very well and very needed because I've had a lot going on these past couple weeks, and I've read quite a few books, I think around 4 or 5, which is probably not that many, but you know. But that means that I'll just have content for the next couple weeks, even if I'm not reading a book a week as I thought I would. Let's get into it. I bought this book because of the first few sentences, since after reading them, I couldn't leave the shop without it. Now I'm going to try and read this like the narrator from the Good Omens show, because that has been the voice of my consciousness ever since I watched it. With a little effort, anything can be shown to connect with anything else. Existence is infinitely cross-referenced, and everything has more than one definition. A cat is a mammal, a narcissist, a companion, a riddle. It instantly drew me in, and I couldn't wait to read it. It's a very interesting read, and definitely very unique compared to most of the other stuff I read. Content warning for mentions and discussions of suicide and the Holocaust. I've included crisis hotlines and websites in the description for anybody struggling right now. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you need help. Now, before I begin talking about the book, this episode might seem a little bit different to some, because it is. In case you don't know, I script out all of my episodes word for word, because I'm scared that without an actual script, I'll just start rambling or go off on a tangent without ever returning to the topic at hand. Over the last few weeks, I've gotten a lot more comfortable with just talking because of the podcast and the way it has a pretty much rigid structure. Intro, summary, review, final thoughts, questions, outro. I'm also taking a public speaking class this semester, which is teaching me to organize my thoughts without needing to script out every word. This episode, I'm stepping a little outside my comfort zone, and while certain parts, like the questions and the summary, will be pretty much fully scripted, I'm going to try and rely mostly on an outline for my review instead of a complete script. I'd really appreciate any feedback you have, whether it's negative or positive. I need all the critique I can get, so feel free to use the form I always have in the description to submit both questions and feedback. Thank you! Matt Lane is a widower in his 60s, and he works as an archivist at an unnamed library, told to preserve a set of letters that T.S. Eliot once wrote and sent to Emily Hale. Roberta Spire, a graduate student in her 30s, appeals to Matt for a look at Eliot's letters. Both Matt and Roberta are highly familiar with T.S. Eliot's poetry, as well as his personal background and history. The novel briefly retells the story of how Eliot placed his first wife, Vivienne Eliot, in a mental institution and how she eventually died. It is gradually revealed that Matt, similarly, placed his own wife, Judith, in a mental institution where she eventually committed suicide. Roberta really reminds Matt and us of Judith because both women are of Jewish ancestry, both read and write poetry, and both have done research on the Holocaust. When Judith was in the mental institution, Dr. Clay made sure she didn't have access to newspapers, yet her aunt and uncle, Len and Carol, smuggled newspapers into her room so that Judith could keep up with the aftermath of the Holocaust. After Judith's death, Matt assumed that the newspapers contributed to her insanity. However, later, when Matt speaks to Roberta about his wife, he admits that his attempts to cut his wife off from the real world did more harm than good in the long run. Now, in the actual book, the university Matt works at could be Princeton, since that is the real-life location where the actual letters that were given by Emily Hale are currently housed. But when you look at the actual book, it is unnamed, and the way they describe where they walk around and travel in that location doesn't really match up with Princeton as the town and the university. I don't care about Matt himself, I care more about his impact on the other characters, since he himself is a very unlikable person, not character. The way I define character and person for myself when I process how I feel about books or characters in books is I divide them into who are they as a character, as in development, character arcs, etc., and who they are as a person, and then I decide, do I like them? And Matt is such an unlikable person. He just does everything wrong, and it ends up negatively impacting everybody he loves in his life. Something else that I noticed pretty soon after starting the book was that there was a lot more of a focus on religion than I initially thought. Based off of those first couple sentences that I read to you in the beginning, I really thought that this would be more of a Eliot, like talking about Eliot and philosophy and everything like that, and what is the meaning of life, that sort of situation. But it's a lot more of a focus on the impact of interreligious relationships, because he's Christian, or he was raised Christian, and Judith was Jewish, and their sort of dynamic, as well as his dynamic between Matt and Roberta later in life, because she's also Jewish and he's, still Christian. So it's a lot more of a focus on different worldviews from those two religions, rather than more of a philosophical angle, which I thought was very interesting. The book is divided into 4 parts. The first, we get some character intros and backgrounds. The second is what I really want to focus on. This part is basically a typed version of Judith's journal that she kept while she was in the institution, and it records all of her thoughts, all of her experiences, everything that she went through while there, and it's so emotionally charged. It's honestly so well written, and it's my favorite part of the book, because you get to see this tragedy that she goes through, and her entire situation is so fascinating to read and analyze, because you can really see how her aunt and uncle influenced her, how Matt and his actions influenced her mental situation and her experience while in the hospital. It's really a very intense part of the book that is definitely not for everybody, but for those that can enjoy it, it is one of the best parts in the book, in my opinion. It's so well written, and it really tells her story, and it conveys those emotions that I think the author really wanted us to feel. It was my favorite part of the book, is all I want to say. Of that part, the ending, the very last entry, almost made me cry, because it's basically her suicide note, where she tells, I want the journals to go here, I want the newspapers to go here, my possessions here and here, and then she adds a quote from one of Eliot's poems. I think it's the four quartets, I'm not sure. And it's beautiful. It is the end of a symphony, a tragically beautiful symphony. And sort of building off of that point, the book is a tragedy about Judith, in a way. Not really Matt, but more so Judith, because she feels like more of a main character than Matt, which might be surprising, but the way she's written and the type of person she is, to me, more important to read about than Matt and his experiences, because you get to see the mental turmoil that this Jewish woman goes through while living in New York during World War II and its aftermath, all while Matt, a Christian man, is commenting off to the side. And I really think that it's more important to talk about her experience rather than his view of that experience. Now, before I talk about the parallels in this book, I do want to mention that I don't know that much about T.S. Eliot or his poetry. I've never really read it. I've never been into poetry itself, but there is a lot of information given about him and his life throughout the book, just sprinkled in there, which really adds to the whole reading experience, because it makes some of the nuances more clear that you otherwise wouldn't know if they didn't give that information ahead of time. That being said, Eliot and Matt are obviously parallels. They both abandoned their wives in a mental hospital, and instead of being there for them through their mental struggles, they abandoned them, and in a way resulted in their deaths, in Viviet and Judith's. They failed both women for their own selfish goals and their own supposed ideals. Another parallel that I noticed is Judith and Roberta. They're both Jewish women, Jewish poets, in post-war New York, grappling with their parents' deaths and the effects of the war and being Jewish in this time. And it's a very interesting dynamic to see between Roberta and Matt throughout the book, because as their relationship builds, you see Matt seeing more and more of Judith in Roberta, where otherwise he wouldn't if he didn't know her. And it's just very interesting to see this relationship progress, knowing how he treated his wife and what their relationship was like. And you can see that he sees Roberta as a way to fix the mistakes he made with Judith. Rather than being there for her, he tries to be there for Roberta. But to be completely honest, it's a bit of a weird dynamic, because towards the end, while the relationship stays platonic, it's so close to being romantic, because Matt does see so much of his dead wife in Roberta that it's almost strange to see them not in a romantic relationship. But regardless of that, it's very interesting to see their relationship build while Matt is also talking about his experiences with his wife and how he feels about her and his memories, because then you can kind of compare and contrast Judith's traits with Roberta's. And I really love Roberta as a character. I think she's really well-rounded. Same as Judith. She's a well-built character in her own right, which I think makes them all the more powerful. In the end, I feel like the book really comes full circle from Judith's journal entries to the fourth part of the book, because the chapters get really short, and seeing as the entire thing, other than her journal, is written from Matt's point of view, it feels like the book parallels itself. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of what I'm thinking. Finally, on some level, I relate to Judith's struggle with living in America in relative safety, while millions of her potential relatives and friends are brutally murdered in a genocide. My parents came here in America as Soviet refugees, and it is so difficult to sit here seeing our homeland getting bombed and destroyed and watch it all happen through the news, watching and knowing that I can't do much else other than donate to AIDS and safety funds. It's an incredible feeling, in a negative way, of course. It's this insane feeling of guilt knowing that all these people are going through this while you, of the same ancestry, are sitting here at home on a couch watching TV, going to Coachella that's going on right now. And it's hard to describe, but I think this book captures it perfectly. Now on a more positive note. In this book, it is mentioned a couple times that the letters donated by Emily Hale to Princeton University are to stay sealed until 2020, which, as we know, passed a little ago, meaning the letters can now be opened and studied by scholars. According to PUL, the letters are under copyright until 2035, but the Elliott estate plans on publishing them online and in print this spring, April 2022. So look out for that if you're interested. Final thoughts? This was an experience, to say the least. Each person's story was heart-wrenching in the best way possible, and watching them grow and develop so well wasn't something I expected from a debut novel. Also, I've noticed I'm reading quite a few debuts, and I'm not really mad because a lot of them are really good. It was a very slow read though, and when I say slow, I mean so slow. It took me forever to get through it, so I'm docking some points for that. Overall, it gets a solid 4 out of 5 stars from me. No questions this week, but I want to say a big thank you to everybody who stuck around during my break. I really needed it, and I really appreciate all of you being so patient with me. Thank you all so much for listening to this episode of Mothman's Bookshop. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you did, and would like to know when the next episode comes out, do yourself a favor and follow the podcast. And if you have any questions or recommendations, feel free to use the form in the description or join the Discord. Once again, my name is Nicole, and I'll see you next week here in Mothman's Bookshop.